Well, welcome everybody to the Sacred Geometry event. And I'm with Lance and Melody and Scott. And I just presume that you've read their bios because we have been doing a little bit of promotion over the last couple of months because we've got our 5-day intensive coming up in August here in New York. But today is about really delivering some really interesting information about sacred geometry. I've been running the Academy for a good sort of 15 years, where we put on special events like this, where we get wonderful teachers together. Over the last couple of years, we've just been doing online events, and we do have a training that's available for purchase that Scott and Melody did in March, and there was it involved 3 Sundays in a row, and that is available for purchase. And that would be a good primer also for those considering doing our August event. And the main thing about the August event is one of the themes of sacred geometry is touching the human soul, right? And that doesn't involve computers. It actually involves humans getting together, having food and wine and celebration of life, and being around a crowd that's passionate about sacred geometry, and doing the hand drawings. What brings people, yes, sacred geometry is a wonderful philosophy. It gets us closer to God. It gets us closer to the divine. Every time we do a drawing, that's the way every cell of your body feels. It's a wonderful intellectual pursuit. We use it for design, aesthetics. Scott has been involved with cutting edge physics with some of the top physics scientists around the world. I've personally been involved with technologies that uses the sacred geometry, like the Therify device and various technologies with Dan Winter involving hydrogen. So it really does have across the board spectrum applications. But when you get together with a group, your soul group, and you actually tactile, you start to actually draw some of these beautiful proportions and harmonics, that's when that sort of deeper feeling starts to happen. And you just can't learn sacred geometry over a computer. Now, I know a lot of courses are out there where they're just doing computer animation, and that's all good stuff, but we've had the privilege of hanging out with some of the pioneers of sacred geometry, like people like Critchlow who have passed on. And their whole thing was about live drawing classes. And that's actually what they, throughout their career, that's what they actually put on. And in fact, Keith Critchlow was part of the Prince Charles's traditional art school, which Lance and Scott were involved with as well. So anyway, that's the little plug for the August training. And now I'm going to, for this first hour, we're going to be having a presentation from our 3 wonderful teachers here. And then we might go over a little bit of an hour because these guys have put a lot of effort into their presentations. So it might go for an hour and 15 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to questions, thoughts, comments, and just so that you guys can have a chance to get some feedback on, and we'd love to hear about your own history with sacred geometry and so forth. So I'm going to hand it over to Scott to begin with. And Scott's theme today is the golden mean ratio, which pretty much most of you would kind of realize that that's the heart and soul of sacred geometry in a way. And Scott is the author of a very best-selling book on the golden mean ratio. So I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Okay.
Yep, and we can see your slide there. It's come up really nice. Yep.
I'm trying to reduce some of the things on the screen here. Okay. So our August workshop, Celebration of Sacred Geometry, We're going to be looking at the sacred geometric principles of the ageless wisdom, a grand unification of the sciences, arts, and consciousness. And the approach we're taking really links us back to the initiation and the ancient mystery schools. Now, my subject today is I'm going to be focusing on the golden section and Plato's mystery surrounding it. Now, I could take you right into the puzzle that he presents, and it's actually fairly simple, but it's so profound that if you're really going to understand it, and many of you already do understand it because you've been trained in this, but I'm going to take you through Plato's approach to it because he is the key to the use of the golden section. So in this short summary presentation, we really want to understand the following: the golden section, the golden ratio, the golden proportion, also known as the divine proportion, and the one and indefinite dyad. Indefinite dyad was known as the greater and the lesser. And as we're going to see, that was the great mystery amongst the ancients. What did Plato and the Pythagoreans mean by the indefinite dyad? We're also going to be looking at the golden mean and the golden mean number system. We'll lead into that. But I'll just give you a little bit of the background. This actually started, this is a lifelong pursuit for me, began with a perinatal experience right after the time of birth, while I was still out of the body. And I had a vision of what's going to happen, and that later developed. And when I went to the University of Minnesota, I did my Platonic aesthetics, my Summa thesis, and this was all part of a vision that I had at the beginning of life. Done a lot of work with near-death experiences. This is a near-birth experience, and some people have had this even much more profound than I had. And so I also did Plato's occult doctrine. This is all back in 75 and 83. Well, first I went to the University of London, worked with David Bohm, but also did work on the intermediate level, that we're going to see this, of dianoia and the mathematicals. That's going to be crucial to understanding Plato in the long run. And in 83, I did my dissertation at University of Florida, the Pythagorean Plato and the golden section, a study in abductive inference. Those three items, that Plato was a Pythagorean, that he was focused on the golden section, and he used a form of logic called abduction, which was rediscovered by Charles Sanders Peirce in the 19th century, looking at Aristotle and Plato. And what they were doing was Plato would present to the Academy members a problem, an anomaly, a puzzle. And the members of the Academy would each abduct, not deduct, not induct, but abduct, which is hypothesis formation, novel reasoning, as we're going to see. And that's crucial to understanding how Plato worked. Then later in 94, with Houston Smith, I worked on Plato and the divine proportion, assent to these first principles. And again, the key is that second principle. Everybody knew about the one or the good, but the key is the indefinite dyad. So the big event for me was in 49, but then in 2005, I had an epiphany working with the shamans in the rainforest. And I was awake for 19 days as a result. And within a year, I had published The Golden Section, which became one of the best sellers in the world, internationally, in 9 languages. I looked the other day, it's still on Amazon. It's number 81 in History of Mathematics. Euclid's Elements is 83. So Euclid's Elements, obviously, right at the core, but we're continuing. Then I did further work with the shamans. And then ultimately, we published the book, Grand Unification of the Arts, Sciences, and Consciousness, Rediscovering the Pythagorean Plato's Golden Mean Number System. And I'm just going to draw your attention to the center of that book. On the left, that's a big phi. On the right, that's a little baby phi. So they are Greek letters, and I'll explain those as we go. And in the center is the 1. We're going to learn that the phi and the phi represent the indefinite dyad of Plato. So here are some basic considerations at the outset. Plato was a Pythagorean, and the Pythagoreans were very strict on not giving out their information to the non-Pythagoreans. It was strictly forbidden. fact, we don't see any notes until Philolaus. There's a few notes from Philolaus much later on. Plato was an initiate of the Egyptian mysteries and the Eleusinian mysteries, probably Samothrakian as well, and maybe some of the others, but we know these for a fact. And he was under the Sodalian oath of silence. You must not reveal the secret to the uninitiate. This is a different deal today. Back then, it was absolutely forbidden, but we are in a dogfight in the world right now, with the world going to the hell in a handbasket. And so the information needs to come out. We're a race, and it's a race against time to try to get this out to the public so that we transform the cosmos, transform the earth relative to the cosmos. So as a result, you have to look to Plato's Agrapha Dogmata, Agrapha unwritten lectures or information. And you can find little fragments of it. You start to put that together, and then you realize that in the dialogues, he's putting the secrets in there, but you have to abduct the solution. Actually, he comes under extreme criticism by what Keith Critchlow called the nocturnal council. You don't want in Athens to be visited by the nocturnal council. He gave out a lot of the secrets in his dialogues of the Eleusinian mysteries, and in his 7th epistle, he defends himself, says he never gave it out, but I'm going to tell you right now, he did, but only for those who have figured out the abductive process of how he worked. So he was a midwife. We usually say Socrates was a midwife, drawing out the information from the students. Plato was doing the same thing by presenting the problems, giving clues, and expecting the students to abduct the solution. By the way, abduction is the way up out of the cave, up into the light, up into the illumination. It's also tied to Plato's notion of how knowledge is gained. It's anamnesis, remembrance. Birth is a forgetting, and life is an act of remembering. And hence, through clues, we begin to remember who we are and what we're up to. So the divided line is the real puzzle. It's so simple. Take a line, cut it unevenly. And I want you to start thinking about that right now. Why a line? Why unevenly? And as a result, he unveils the one and the indefinite dyad. In the Timaeus, he presents what are purportedly the most beautiful triangles which construct the cosmos. The trouble is, he doesn't tell us how to build the dodecahedron, because to do so, he would have revealed what is given out in the mysteries. This is another thing I'll mention right now. It'll come up later. In the mysteries, the rules of proportion, the secrets of proportion were given out. How did people prepare for the mysteries? They studied the Pythagorean quadrivium, the harmonics, the arithmetic, the geometry, and the spherics. Those 4 disciplines, all mathematical, they were prepared, they get initiated, and the big secret was revealed, but it was forbidden, as I said, to reveal it. Plato's insights and today's grand unification of the sciences, arts, and consciousness are really one thing. It's Muhammad al-Nashi who figured out, using E-infinity theory, the same thing that Plato did, and we really kind of knocked it out of the park in terms of the present day physics. So Plato as an initiate, here you see the Eleusinian mysteries, an image of it based upon the myth of Persephone being abducted by Hades, and Demeter goes in search, and you have the initiate who's naked. The ego is given up. So there's a descent into the telesterion, into the underworld. And then there's an ascent. There's an ego death, and then there's an awakening. And they would drink the kukion, and they'd go into these transformative states of consciousness. Same thing in the Egyptian mysteries. Here are the 5 regular solids. Now, 3 of them over on the right here all have root 3 as the guiding ratio. Root 3 is to 1. If you bisect the equilateral triangle, you'll get your root 3. Over here on the left, your Earth, you have a cube, and so the faces are squares. You do a diagonal, you'll get your root 2. What's missing, and it's conspicuous by its absence. Keith and I used to talk, Critchlow, we used to talk about this all the time. It's conspicuous by its absence. It's left out for a reason. And then Plato gives the big hint that many people have missed. And as an initiate, as I've said, he was tied down by the Sedalian oath under penalty of death. Hippasus, the Pythagorean, thank heavens he did it, but he paid a very severe penalty. He constructed from the 12 pentagons the dodecahedron, and he did it in written form in what's called the mystic speech. I've been really looking very closely at this, and it looks like he was, in fact, an acousmatikoi, not a mathematikoi. The Pythagoreans were divided into these two subsets, and the mathematikoi were the ones really involved deeply in the mathematics of what's really going on. Acousmatikoi were doing the harmonies and the rhythms and the music, but they didn't take the forbidden secret as seriously. Hippasus was put out to sea in an open boat, and he lost his life as a result. So Plato was the midwife. And as I've already pointed this out, he'd present the problem, the puzzle, the anomaly, the apparent contradiction or incomplete result, intending that the attentive student, member of the academy, or reader of the dialogues would abduct an explanatory hypothesis, overcoming the apparent contradiction or incomplete result. Now, it's really strange how so many scholars of Plato have not figured this out, that he was coming up with dead ends for a reason to get the student to figure out the real secret. And he provides clues along the way. So for example, in the Timaeus, 53D to 54A, these then we assume to be the original elements. He's talking about those triangles we just talked about, root 2 and root 3, of fire and the other bodies. But the principles which are prior to these, deity only knows, and those who are a friend of deity, anyone who can point out a more beautiful form than ours, hint, 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 for the construction of these bodies shall carry off the palm, not as an enemy, but as a friend. He who disproves what we are saying and shows that we are mistaken may claim a friendly victory. One of the things I worked on immensely, we're not going to look at it today, we'll do it in our workshop, is I will show you how root 2 and root 3 emerge out of the womb of the greater and the lesser, of the golden ratio and what's going to turn out to be its reciprocal. Out of the one and the indefinite dyad, all numbers, all existence emerges, and that's Plato. So he does give a hint at the beginning of the Timaeus, and here again, people tend to miss it. So here's your root 2 triangle and your root 3 triangle, but they also accepted, you can read it in the Timaeus or in Speusippus on Pythagoreanism, that the equilateral triangle unbisected represented 1, because all the sides are equal. The root 2 triangle is 2, root 3 triangle 3, but Plato begins the Timaeus with 1, 2, 3. But where is the 4th, my dear Timaeus? Yes, it's true. There were 4 people present yesterday. One of them is ill. He's missing. But this is Plato's subtle levels of meaning, esoteric meanings that are piled in that the reader must be attentive to. Now, according to Plato, the one and the indefinite dyad, which he spoke of as the great and the small, the greater and the lesser, are the principles of all things, and even of the forms at the highest level, which are infused, enfolded, interleaved into the sensible world of particulars that we live around. So the great mystery was always, what were the greater and the lesser of the indefinite dyad? My life has been focused on figuring that out and then bringing it out. Now, in the Parmenides, Plato presents another anomaly, a very important puzzle. Plato poses this serious problem, what's called the worst difficulty argument. knowledge of the intelligible realm, which is immaterial, which would be where the forms are, and as we're going to learn the mathematicals, if that intelligible immaterial realm cannot connect with the sensory sensible realm below our world of everyday experience, we have a big problem. If there's a complete bifurcation of the realms of being and becoming, or the immaterial and the material, you have the same problem we have today with dualism, mind-body problems, mind-brain. How does the immaterial connect with the material? And that's the secret of proportion. And in the Timaeus, Plato gives the hint. He makes it clear that two things cannot be put together without a third, the intermediate. There must be some bond of union between them. And the fairest bond is that which makes a complete fusion of itself and the things which it combines. And proportion, analogia, is best adapted to affect this union. And in fact, it's what's called continuous geometric proportion that is going to be the key in the end, but it's very important for our workshop for us to begin to get into our mind. Yes, there's the Hermetic maxim. Yes, it's central to everything. As above, so below, and as below, so above. But the key is there's the mesocosm. You must insert into the intermediate position the connection that gives you proportion. Otherwise, you just have ratios and it doesn't work. So we must get an idea of what, for example, in the Christian New Testament, John chapter 1, verse 1. See, many of these scriptures of different religions harken back to the ancient mystery schools, and they're remnants of these deep mysteries. So logos is the key. In the beginning was the logos. Before there's logos, there's no relationship. There's just the one. But the one does the primordial scission. But the ancient Egyptians called the first scissors, the first cut. And that's ratio. The logos is ratio, relationship between two magnitudes. So for example, 1:2, or we can say 1/2, or you could say 2:1, or 2/1. Analogos is proportion. That's when you have repeating ratios. For example, 1:2 is as 4:8, or you could say 1/2 equals 4/8. Now notice you have four terms here. Now also you cannot have proportion unless the ratios are equivalent. Really key point. This is called discontinuous proportion because it involves four different terms, a 1, a 2, a 4, and an 8. Now you can do it with three terms, as we're going to see here. Continuous proportion occurs when we have, for example, 1:2 is as 2:4. There are only three terms. The 2 is used twice here. So it's 1:2:4. Now let me ask you, what would you say if you asked what is the ratio of 8:4 or 9:3? And I'm sure you would say 8:4. You could say 4:2, but more likely you'd say 2:1. Or 9:3 is the same as 3:1. You want to make your denominator 1 when you're looking at these ratios and reducing them down, if you can, reduce it down to 1. So we have Plato's lambda. Lambda is the Greek letter. It looks like an upside down V, and he begins with 1. And on the left-hand side, you have even numbers, right-hand side, odd numbers. This is going to come up later when we look at the similes in the Republic. When we go from the 1, the sun simile that divides it into 2, we'll see that the divided line breaks it into 4, and then the cave breaks it into 8. And you'll notice here that each of these numbers, like 2 is the geometric mean between 1 and 4. Not going to do a lot of this today, but just notice it's so simple. 1 times 4 is 4. The geometric mean is what is the square root of 4? What number times itself will give you 4? Well, 2 times 2. So 2 is the geometric mean of 1 and 4. 4 is a geometric mean of 2 and 8. 2 times 8 is 16. So 4 is the geometric mean. That's really important. You see the same thing over here. 1 times 9 is 9. 3 is the square root of 9. 3 times 27 is 81. 9 times 9 is 81. So you see how he's getting the geometric means here in these number series. So here's the secret. Very simple. And Plato got away with it. He was not executed. He came very, very close, by the way, very close. He simply says, take a line and cut it uneven. Well, why a line? We know from the quadrivium of the Pythagoreans that arithmetic, pure numbers are simple. You go to lines, now you're in a dimension. You go to a plane, you got a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional with a solid. Why a line? And then why unevenly? Well, numbers sometimes cannot be written out, especially if they're irrational. If the digits go all the way to infinity, as happens, as we're going to see with the golden cut, with the golden section. But with a line, you can golden cut it geometrically. Now you could cut it up here, or you could cut it down here. So the uneven cut can be on one side or it can be on the other. But the key is there's only one place on either side that you can actually perform this and get the ratio that the whole is to the longer segment in the same ratio as the longer segment is to the shorter. That's the primordial scission, the golden cut, the golden section. That's why this is going to be different from the golden ratio. So listen closely. So we start out with 1. We golden cut it. We're going to call this 1 over phi. This is actually little baby phi. We could have used the lowercase letter to indicate 0.6180339 on to infinity. It's an irrational number. This one over here is going to be little baby phi squared. Now, you know, if you have 1/2 and you multiply 1/2 times 1/2, it doesn't grow bigger. It grows smaller. 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. This is called fractalizing. What happens in the universe and all of nature is you get self-similarity because at the beginning of the universe, golden cut, primordial scission occurs, and then it keeps scissioning all the way up, all the way down, all the way down to the quarks. Any level you're at is self-similar. That's why in the Delphic Oracle, man, know thyself. That's simply telling you, if you figure out the geometry of the human body, you know the geometry of the solar system, of the galaxy, of the universe, of the cells, the quarks, of physics itself. Okay, but now when you ask yourself, what's the ratio of that whole line to the longer segment? That longer segment is going to become 1. And the whole line is now going to become big phi is to 1 in the same ratio as 1 is to little baby phi. Automatically, through a single golden cut, you already now have the internal, how can I tell you this? It's so profound. This is the principle of equilibrium of the entire universe, and everything in it is right before your eyes. This is going to be the 1, and this is the indefinite dyad through a simple cut. So here again, we see we have the greater, big phi is to 1, is 1 is to phi. We see it down below. And these middle terms are collapsing. That's why this becomes the golden mean. I didn't even put that in the intro, but what's really, really odd, we can talk about this later. 1 becomes the golden mean between the two extremes. Yes, these are golden ratios, both of them on the outside, but 1 now becomes the golden mean between greater and lesser. This, by the way, if you're into theosophy, you're into the ancient wisdom, this is what the Mahatmas call the principle of equilibrium. This is the principle of karma. This is the principle of balance. It's all written into nature. So we can do this vertically now. So we have the whole line, we have the longer, and we have the shorter. By the way, if this was a person standing with the bottom of their feet here, top of the head there, that's the navel. The navel cuts us at the golden cut. So we have the whole is to the longer segment in the same ratio as the longer to the shorter. And we see out of it, we get our phi, our 1, and our little baby phi. So the 1 in the indefinite dyad, very, very simple. Not only that, If you multiply the greater times the lesser, you get 1. If you subtract them, you get 1. It brings you back to unity, back to the source. If you take the geometric mean, you multiply them together and ask what their square root is, it's 1 or minus 1. So there's a little trick in there. Okay, I was going to show you the with the divider, but we'll just do it here. The phalanges of the fingers are all in golden proportion. So if you measure the tip, the distal phalange, and you compare it to the medial phalange, they're in golden ratio. But so is the medial phalange in relationship to the proximal phalange, up closer to your knuckles up here. So, and the whole thing, we are a resonant harmonics of the golden ratios. So is everything in nature. Yes, you get root 2s, you get root 3s, you get square root of 5. We'll see all of that in our workshop, but this is the mother. This is the mother fractal of all fractals. And Melodi and I, when we went to Peru and worked with the artists down there, and then now their pupils, we had them build these golden calipers. We're going to do that in our workshop as well. So here's the primordial scission. Actually, the pyramids in Egypt and the Giza Plateau, Great Pyramid in particular, but actually all of them are monuments to this basic system of proportion. Great Pyramid in particular has it in spades. So here's what Plato did, and it's just magnificent if you start to think about it. And I've got to move this bar up in the top here, put it down there. What he does is in the divided line, which is what this is, up on the top, this is the intelligible realm. This is his ontology. Ontos is existence. This is what exists in the universe. Here's his epistemology, episteme, knowledge, how we come to know. And up on the top here, the intelligible realm is where we have episteme. You can come to know things. However, down in the sensory realm, where we spend most of our existence, you have the ordinary objects and you can have beliefs about them, but it's always opinion. It's only when you can tether up, you can see what's going on up in the intelligible realm, that you can tether it, tie it, and really make sense of it. And then of course there's the distorted realm, acacia, false conjecture. Ultimately, we're going to see, however, if one goes into illumination, you come back down into the cave and you beautify the world with beautiful art. And we're going to see this where Plato objected to people simply doing mimicry of sensible objects down here. I'll show you in a second. What he wants you to do is go to the mathematicals, which are like the forms. They're perfect. Whereas the forms are individual, we're going to see that the mathematicals, there are multiple, because they in fact are infused, enfolded into the sensory objects. David Bohm, the great physicist, who was one of my teachers at Birkbeck, always made it clear that it's the enfolding of the implicate order that we're going to find up here in forms and mathematicals into the ordinary objects that's the key, into the explicate, the outer, the exterior order, and that's the key. And again, this is the golden cut going right across here. The other thing to realize is his principles of aesthetics are built in here, as I was actually starting to tell you, as to how you as an artist would look to the mathematicals, which are the forms expressed in the nature, and then you bring those out, and that's how you do your artwork. And that's where all the abstract art that we're now beginning to realize, the Theosophists and the others, brilliant around the turn of the century when they were looking at these things. Okay, so here's the deal. And I'll tell you before I even start this, take a look. So here's your golden cut right across here. And that's why the pentagram is so significant, because it's all golden cuts. All I did is I took my point of my compass here, stuck it in there, pencil lead there, arc down, cut the line here. There's the secret of the divided line. You don't have to do anything else. It's very, very simple. And so it's the whole line is to the upper level, which is your intelligible, as the intelligible is to the sensible down below, as in the same ratio as the forms are to the mathematicals, in the same ratio as the ordinary objects are to the shadows on the wall, if they're done correctly. But here's the other thing that's in there that most scholars, they miss this. Plato embeds it in the Republic. He inserts this racial relationship. He says the forms are to the ordinary objects. You see that ratio now? Phi is to 1, is as the mathematicals are, now think of your artist, to the art forms that we construct and create down below once we're illuminated. If we're not illuminated, we stay down in the lower world. The problem is this becomes false conjecture down at the bottom. That's why the prisoners in the cave are watching these shadows, or watching our television sets. We're seeing all this nonsensical political, we're seeing all the crap of the advertising that distorts the truth. And you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's what Plato does. He embeds in the divided line the secret of the one and the indefinite dyad. He gets away with it. This is, and I didn't label it, these are the forms up here. They're the same as what you're going to see here with the mathematicals, but they're perfect. And they're singular, but down here, they're many. Here's the everyday objects: people, animals, trees, shells, pine cones, whatever. But notice that these are equivalent in some deep, profound sense, as we've already noticed. So what's happening is, when one begins to understand what Plato's actually up to, is these levels collapse. Or another way of looking at it is they overlap and they become one. So what you see here is what's actually infused into nature. And so you get phi is to 1 as 1 is to phi. And it's really, this is what's happening in the end. So as David Bohm would say, the essential features of quantum interconnectedness are that the whole friggin', well, he didn't say friggin', the whole universe is in some way enfolded in everything, and that each thing is enfolded in the whole. I wish I could stand up here now and you could see me, because what Bohm did when he would do these things, if it was really important, he would spin. He'd be up at his board. He had only 3 students. I met with him in his office with 2 physicists, and I was the philosopher. And he'd stand up there and he'd do a pirouette. He'd jump up in the air and he'd spin around, and he'd show us. And he did the same thing when he told us about how black holes turn into white holes. So for Plato, according to Aristotle, in the Nicomachean Ethics, for Plato too was right in raising this question and asking, as he used to do with the members of the academy, are we on the way from or to the first principles? Okay, if you're on the way from the first principles, you're coming down deductively and inductively. So the logic is deduction and induction, which most people understand. Inductive generalization and deductive, etc. However, abduction, which most people don't understand, is the center of all scientific eurekas. Archimedes coming up with buoyancies in the bathtub, he jumps, eureka, I got it. Or Kepler looking at the orbits of the planets and realizing, oh my God, this is an orbital, it's elliptical orbits, etc., making these abductive. Einstein, same thing. 3 anomalies: black body radiation, photoelectric effects, specific heats. Nobody could understand them. You couldn't figure it out. He put it in the hopper in the left hemisphere. And this is the thing about abduction that's really important. The right hemisphere picks it up. If you ask the right question, the answer come back. That's why Jung and others would talk about synchronicity, divination, meaningful coincidences, etc. So this is what's called dialectic. When you're moving up out of the cave into the light, it's really abduction. So we have the prisoners in the cave who are bound, watching the shadows on the wall. Unbeknownst to them, behind them, there's a wall and there's a fire, and individuals are holding up these objects and they're seeing these shadows, which they think are the real. So that's much of our perception in our everyday world. Here's an image that maybe shows it a little bit more easily. You see the with the wall, the kind of the transition stage, because these are transition stages that one goes through. You see them holding up the shadows. And now this is the part of the dialectical ascent. Now notice here what Plato has done. So again, we have our divided line of the four parts. What I can tell you where most scholars make a mistake, they go immediately when Plato says, take a line, cut it unevenly. He then says, take those two segments and cut them in the same ratio. They go immediately there. They forget that the big question is, why cut a line unevenly to begin with, and what is it giving us? You know, if you cut it in the center, it's good because you have 2:1, but then the parts are going to be 1:1. 2:1 and 1:1 are not equivalent. Yes, it's like an octave, and it's great, but there's a real secret here. So as you can see, here's the cutting line right here, and here's the wall down here. Here's another wall or ascent up out of the cave, and you begin to look at the shadows, reflections in water. Ultimately, the prisoner who's been released and comes up out of the cave can look at the objects themselves and ultimately to the sun, and then begins to understand. And that's really what's going on here when he does the initial cut. The sun simile cuts it into two parts. That's really the golden cut. What's really interesting is Plato would put this cut in the dialogue. They used to do these things on a scroll. J. Kennedy has pretty much figured this out. And the golden cut is where this sun simile occurs, and then the divided lines, more cuts, etc. But these are all related, because notice what he does. You go from the 1 to the 2 to the 4 to the 8, hint, hint, hint. It's all continuous geometric proportion. And furthermore, if you just now, again, change it, it's all relative, the 1 into the initial 2, 4, 8. What we've done further, we're not going to do it here, but we'll talk about this in our workshop. We've already figured this out in quantum mechanics, and this is absolutely precise. Each of these are golden ratio numbers to the powers, the little baby phi. So with the initial cut that occurs in the sun simile, you have your pre-quantum particle and your pre-quantum wave. And then those become related to Einstein's space-time. You see it here again in the divided line. And you get your unroot temperature, and you get your Hardy entanglement and the Barbero-Mirzi parameter. Again, not explaining this. In the workshop, we'll look at it. But what's really important here, many people are familiar with entanglement, and it's at the heart. They now say that is the key to quantum mechanics. The most important thing is entanglement or non-locality. Well, guess what? It occurs at exactly the lesser golden ratio to the 5th power, discovered by Lucian Hardy. There's no question about it. So I call this a precious jewel or stone in some of my writings. The golden mean number system, which we will explain more in our workshop, is rooted in the golden section, or as the ancient Egyptians called it, the primordial scission, emerging out of what Plummer called, one of the theosophists, the great breath. It is also known to the Mahatmas. You can find this in the Mahatma letters to AP Senate. Most important letter that I found, because I've studied them in detail, is number 90, chronologically, or number 22, if you're looking at the old version, is the principle of equilibrium. Kutumi states, we recognize but one law in the universe, the law of harmony, of perfect equilibrium. And the great alchemist, Schwaller de Lubitsch, after studying the Temple of Luxor for 15 years, he concluded the golden section is not a product of mathematical imagination, but the natural principle of the laws of equilibrium. Yes, we can construct it using the square root of 5 plus 1 divided by 2, or square root of 5 minus 1 divided by 2, but before that, it is a pre-number principle. They get all integers, all numbers are created out of the indefinite dyad. We'll show you that in our workshop. One last little quick thing is the Fibonacci numbers. I figured we probably needed to at least address it because it comes up in people's mind. Anytime you have two Fibonacci numbers adjacent, especially as you go larger, they merge into the golden ratio in the limit, and they alternate above and below. Same thing with Lucas numbers. We're not going to talk about Lucas numbers now, but that also means anytime you have three numbers like 5, 8, 13, 13 would be like the greater, 5 would be like the lesser, and 8 would be the approximate geometric mean. Now, here's the catch. Fibonacci numbers are nature's way of taking this golden principles and putting it into whole numbers, which we see everywhere in nature. Very quickly, 5 times 13 is 65. But 8 is the square root of what number? 64. So when we multiply 5 times 13 as the formula, you have to subtract 1. If we went down 1, we went 3, 5, 8. 3 times 8 is 24, but 5 is a square root of 25. So we have to add 1. You alternately add or subtract 1. 1 is always coming back in to take the Fibonacci numbers and merge them back into unity. We see one example of this, and that's all we're going to do, is John Martineau's work with Venus, seeing it from the Earth over an 8-year period. If you're standing on Earth and you're connecting Venus over an 8-year period, what happens is you get a 5-fold rosette of 5 over the 8-year period. But on Venus, it's 13 years. 13 is to 8 as 8 is to 5. So you see what's going on here. It's the same thing that we find also down with the phyllotaxis, which we really didn't get into today. However, if you look at, for example, the pineapple, you'll see 8 spirals gradually here. If you go more vertical, you're going to get 13. Here you go 21, or you can have 5, 8, 13. So again, it's mimicking the 1 in the indefinite dyad always. And so the golden key for Fibonacci numbers, and later we'll talk Lucas numbers, even more fascinating, is the 1 and the indefinite dyad, the golden key. So in our workshop, what I will be doing along with Melodi and Lance, I'll be focusing again on Plato's secret doctrine. I gave you a little taste of it here, but it's much, much deeper and more profound. And we're going to be looking at the significance of several biometric anomalies we find. In the new book, we have like 42 anomalies, many of them biometric, related to the physical body, the human skull, skulls of big cats, etc., cardiac patterns, blood pressure, the gait, again and again, Neanderthal and Homo sapien genetics, all of it is interrelated. And it's ubiquitous presence throughout all of these different subdisciplines: quark masses, chaos border, fine structure constant, crystallography, DNA structure, and I've mentioned some of these others, but even weather turbulence, planetary orbits, dark energy, dark matter. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And ultimately, it's at the heart of aesthetics. Perfect function in science is beauty, because science comes up where truth is related here in the indefinite dyad, and beauty is the aesthetics. So when you have perfect function in science, you're getting actual beauty aesthetically at the same time, and the good is the one. So it's all resolved into beauty, truth, and goodness. Thank you. That was my 2 cents.
Well,
Okay.
thank you, Scott, for those 2 cents.
Okay.
Guys, I'm sure you've got lots of questions, but just write them down for now, because we really want to just keep the flow happening here, because we're going to pass it on to Melodi, and she also has a presentation. I'm going to make Melodi's, you've got the co-host there, so Melodi, take it over.
Okay, welcome everyone again. And I'm so impressed by Scott's presentation, so I don't know how to start, definitely.
Bit of a hard act to follow, Scott, sometimes.
No, come on.
Definitely.
No.
And so I'm really proud of being in this group for our sacred geometry celebration. And so what Scott have mentioned so much. So I would love to start with the ether that you will touch in the meeting, in the gathering in August. So this is like the one that Scott have mentioned about the dodecahedron, which is 12 pentagon, but it has beautiful triangles that Plato have mentioned. So this is really like a synergetic structure. So it is directly on its own, has its own energy when it is viewed properly in a structural order, how nature is doing, how universe is doing. So as Scott have mentioned about the David Bohm's quote as unfoldment of the universe. So we will really touch these structures and play with these and see how these forms will integrate with nature. And as Scott have mentioned about the caliper, so maybe pinning me is much better. So I'm doing.
Yeah, I've already done it.
Myself.
Yeah, you're pinned.
I hope everybody sees me a little bit bigger right now.
Yeah, they are.
Could I add, Melody, one sec? If they go to the upper right on view and put, instead of gallery view, put speaker view, then Melody will get really large.
Yeah.
In case you're not having that.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And maybe you will have something to add. So I'm also adding pin to you, Scott. Is it okay?
Ooh, that's okay, but you got the floor.
Okay, so like the dodecahedron I mentioned, it is just an unfoldment of space, and it gets itself into a sphere, and we will touch all these forms together and sense them. So this workshop will be really focused on really experiencing, really sensing, and as the caliper that I'm always using, the golden ruler, I'm always saying. So we will do some models like this. And as Scott mentioned, so I just want to show like this. Yeah. And I'm a little bit, yep, this one. So you can see how the ratio is really making it bigger and bigger. So we will do, again, this is also about the structural orders that I have learned from scientific conclusions. So we will bring this into our workshop again. And another one that is just recently followed up, like a one into a different structure, and which is also making a star tetrahedron. So these are all unfoldments, and we will really experience them. And this is also built with the beautiful triangle, as Plato have mentioned. And we have lots of models like this and like this. So we will really experience by really touching them. And so I just want to share a little bit of presentation after Scott. Here you go.
Melody, could I ask, could you show that metal one, open that up for them? This is Melody's, she developed this. This is, can you just show them real quick?
So this is the torus. And this is the torus again. And it is the division of the cells. And it is many become one. So we will touch these and really feel them. So you will really get the understanding of the tensegrity and the synergetic structures, how nature is building up. And Scott. Okay. So that's why we will have a really big hands-on part as well as the presentation. So it will be really mostly the sacred geometry feeling sessions in our workshop. And I want to share some presentation, if it is okay right now. So, open. 1 minute. So, celebration of sacred geometry. So, as we have mentioned, Roger have mentioned in the beginning that we had done an online workshop, which is called Sacred Geometry and the Transformation of Consciousness in March. So we would love you to watch this videos. It was just 3 hours, but we did like mostly 5 hours, and thanks to all the participants. And we covered lots of things there. And I will dive a little bit more deep on this. But before that, last year, we have done with Scott Olsen a workshop based on sacred geometry, and we mentioned about the nature's language, especially. And we did drawing and building techniques using tools and building some models. And it was in Peru with the artists of Pablo Maringo, and it was really amazing and intensive 3 days workshop with the artists and with the artist students. And we have covered so many connections of sacred geometry with nature, with our own existence. And so these are some photos from there. And you see like how we see the golden section, especially in nature, we really experiment that. And there were some models that we played with, and we drove and do so many intensive building techniques and drawing techniques. And in our 3-day workshop in Academy of Sacred Geometry, so we focused on Mother Nature is calling, Ageless Wisdom is calling, and Transformation is calling. So it was totally exciting new approach to sacred geometry linked to initiation in the ancient mystery schools. So it was the most powerful part that brings Scott's knowledge, especially about the Plato's understanding and into our reality. And this on face-to-face workshop in New York, it is totally called Sacred Geometric Principles and the Ageless Wisdom, a grand unification of the sciences, arts, and consciousness. So again, it's totally linked to initiation in the ancient mystery schools. And Lance will bring so many impressive things that he had already been into the sites, and also get these geometry into alive. And what we will cover in this face-to-face workshop, that Scott has already mentioned some, but I would love to read them. So we will crack the code of Plato's secret doctrine and uncovering the underlying principles, and the resulting golden mean number system and its central role in the science, arts, and consciousness, the sacred geometric principles of nature, focusing on biomimicry, ecology, and sustainability, and the human body, aesthetics canons of proportion and energetic transformations. And we will talk about sacred measures, golden mandalas, transformative experience amongst the ancient Egyptians, Chinese, Hebrew Kabbalists, Greeks, Aztecs, and Florentine Renaissance artists and philosophers. An enhanced group of drawings and 3D geometric constructions, including Metatron's cube, 3D Metatron's cube, golden chalice of Orion, Felt's mystic Kabbalistic figure, the golden mandala, the construction of the Platonic solids, and some of the Archimedean and Catalan and golden ruler assembly. And we will go on resonance, attunement, and the transformation of consciousness, what it means to live in a fractal holographic universe, and the potential of the whole universe unfolded into each one. In essence, we will see how the one becomes many, and an idea of how each of the many may return back onto the one. So we will cover, but they are not the limited ones. And I just want to follow a little bit quicker in this part, and maybe following week we will have another session with Roger that I will dive a little bit more deeper. And within this subject, I will cover the circle, the sphere of life, art and science and consciousness with relating with conscience, nature's genius, nature's language, by inspired structural systems, synergy, and hands-ons that I'm calling H2Os, which is really the main ingredient of elements, water. So the circle, sphere, and the connection with the golden, the flower of life, and the golden mean and golden section, and everything that is occurred in the nature behind this mathematical and geometrical formulations, and also the understanding of platonic solids and how we really formed into this existence, and what is the cycle, what is the circle, and how to think of this circular way. And the whole universe is linked from really macro to macro with so many same identical principles. And the torus is really the main unit that I have already shown you that I'm playing with. And the most importantly, we are living in a world in this world with a really wonderful treasure of so many different species. And we are just here evolved in this, if this is the timeline. So this is the human just evolved, and we have so many things to learn from. And arts and science has already tried to understand these principles, but really going deeper and looking deeper to universe, to nature, with the understanding of our own nature is so critical for applying into science, for applying into our arts. And this is really the transformation of consciousness with the conscience. And we will talk about the global eco-village network, which is the communities that gather for really sustaining this world with aligning with nature and with their whole system thinking. So we will dive into what is real sustainability with the understanding of our left, right, and also the bridge of our understanding of this universe with the especially electromagnetic field. And we will talk about the electromagnetic field of the flower of life as well, really experiencing it. And we will dive into a little bit of biomimicry, kinetic architecture, permaculture, regeneration, especially from Design Science Studio, and the human nature. And we will see the relations that have already, Scott has mentioned about the realms of differences. So we will really experience and express them as well. And we will see the understanding of what could nature teach us. And we will dive into the design principles of nature and of the universe, and deep looking and really understanding the form function correlation in nature, reason and purpose, that all design forms have reason and purpose behind everything, and the understanding of the macro to macro and the relationship of the part and whole connection, and one become many, many become one. So we will dive into the principles of nature with the types of equilibrium that also Scott have mentioned about the perfect equilibrium, and which is we will talk about the synergetic of the systems, and which is also in the body, in the cell, in the universe. So we will really, and also in the community. And I was so inspired and learned so much from Kate Critchlow's books. I was unlucky to be with him in his workshops, but I'm so lucky to be with all of you, especially with Scott, Lance, and Roger, that have already linked with Kate Critchlow.
A little change timeline.
What? And we will talk about order in space. And we will talk about the teacher of Kate Critchlow's, Buckminster Fuller, about the synergetics, which is the explorations in the geometry of thinking, and especially with the 10 segregated systems, which is also in our own cells. So in the hands-ons, we will make, feel, sense, experience, and visualize. And we will dive into nature's forms, nature's shapes, golden ruler, and Metatron's cube with 3D and magnets, and geometry of space, and Platonic solids, Archimedean and Catalan solids. So these are some informations and some shapes that we will experience in our workshop. And this is a quote that came into me like 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. To feel the unity, all parts need to feel the wholeness as well. So thank you so much for your whole existence. And you can also communicate and follow Timaeus Academy. So with that we have just recently published. So that's and you can connect with me these Instagrams. So thank you so much. And I want to show one more thing with this new model again. So as you see, this is the tetrahedron. So 4 triangles. But with the shape shifting, it turns into a cube. So these are the things that we will experience there, and we will really enjoy them. So thank you.
Thanks, Melody. Keep your questions. I'm sure you've got some questions for Melody, but we're gonna move on to Lance and Lance Harding. I'll just pin Lance. Hi there, Lance.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I just want to explain what I'm going to be teaching at the workshop in August. Just take a couple of minutes to do that, and then I'll go to my PowerPoint, because I want you to start thinking in other dimensions. And I'm going to compare ancient America with ancient Middle East. But anyway, I'm going to just make a quick quote here. Make a circle out of a man and a woman, out of this a square, out of this a triangle. Make a circle and you will have the Philosopher's Stone. Okay, and when I started studying the Philosopher's Stone, now with Keith Critchlow, he taught me a little about Pythagorean and Platonic philosophy when I studied with Keith Critchlow. And of course, I learned a lot from Scott as well. But when I started studying the Philosopher's Stone, I found out that it's not just turning lead into gold. Okay, that's not what it is. It's an actual alchemical formula to come to give a new birth. It's like a spiritual rebirth, and all religions teach similar things. But then I discovered that the golden section is really the basis of all of it. When I started putting a man and woman inside of a circle and a square, the Vitruvian man figures, I found out the navel was always at the center of the circle, but the navel was also always at the golden section of the height of the square that the man was standing in. And so in my drawings, I based the height of the man on pi and the golden section on the navel and everything. And I discovered that the navel represents the divine nature and pi represents the perfect stature of the ideal man, but it all relates to a circle. Just like it described in the Philosopher's Stone description that I just read, and so on. And so when I teach the workshop, I'm going to have the students do drawings. Okay, that's my main point on the basics of ancient geometry, which I studied with Keith Critchlow, namely the golden mandala, or what I call the golden mandala, or the star cut diagram. And one of my fellow students even wrote a book on that. I studied, of course, at the Princess School of Traditional Arts in London. And I worked with Keith Critchlow and Paul Marchant and other people there. I also studied Islamic patterns and basic ancient geometry principles. When Keith would teach his geometry classes, he would actually make sure we did the drawings and followed what he did. And see, I was never very good at mathematics, but when I started studying geometry and following Keith Critchlow, I actually started understanding mathematics a lot more too. So it really helped my thinking out. But anyway, I'm going to work on that, and I'm going to talk about Masonic geometry and as above, so below, based on certain geometric principles of the triangle, square, and circle. And then I'm going to talk about the Vitruvian Man, the ancient canons of the human body, Egyptian and Greek canons of the human body, and how they're actually all derived from geometry. Okay, when I did my research, I discovered they were all using geometric principles, not just dividing square. Their square grids come from geometry, okay, not the other way around. And then I'm going to talk about at our workshops in New York about the 3 Greek mean ratios. With like Scott is going to relate that to the golden section, and I will work with Scott on that and discuss those principles, and also different golden proportion progressions that I've studied a lot about and so on, and be working with Scott and those things. And then I'll get eventually to the Kabbalistic tree of life, geometry behind that, and the religious symbolism behind the tree of life, because the tree of life actually relates to the human body and the image of God and the character and attributes of God as the ancient Hebrews saw it. So I'll get into that as well. Anyway, I want to go to my PowerPoint now.
First, yeah.
From the beginning. Okay, it's on the screen now. Can you see that? I got to hit share. How do I
You
get
just
share?
got to, yeah, you got to share screen.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah, that's come up really nice. Yeah.
Good job.
Okay, I'm going to make a comparison between an outdoor sacred temple site that the Native Americans had in southern Utah and compare it to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem quickly here, okay? This petroglyph that you're seeing here is a huge petroglyph. They call it the zipper glyph, but when we studied it, we found out it's actually a calendar and a map. It's a map of the Parowan Gap, which is a split mountain. In the little narrow part, there's a bulb at the bottom with the narrow part there. And whoops, go back. And that bulb at the bottom, anyway, this is a huge petroglyph. It's over 10 feet tall, and the whole rock there is over 15 feet tall. It's enormous in size. And they were watching all the sunsets through the split mountain, which I'll show you a picture of. And they were recording their calendar in the petroglyphs there by using rock cairns in the valley on the east, which is represented by the little bulb at the bottom of that V shape. The valley on the east, they put rock cairns there, and they would watch all the sunsets on the equinoxes, solstices, and beginning and end of the 260-day calendar. And they would watch the sunsets through the gap and then record that information. They were using dots and tick marks and lines and all kinds of different things on this petroglyph to record the calendar on it. And then up in the corner, you have a little God figure up at the top with 3 circles and a 4th circle in the middle. There are 3 circles connected to the 4th circle. That represents the equinoxes and the solstice in between. Okay, now we spent lots of time counting and figuring out the calendar here. It would take hours to explain it, but it's actually a 260-day Mayan calendar being used right in Utah in the western United States. And so they brought that calendar. The Aztecan tribes migrated up into North America and up into Utah, and the ancient Fremont Indian tribe, as we call them, and the Paiutes and the Utes and all these tribes that were in Utah are relatives of the Aztecan tribes in Mesoamerica. The 260-day calendar actually originated in Azapa, Mexico, in southern Mexico, at a huge ancient temple site down there. Okay, and all of the archaeologists agree with that, and they all say that's where it originated. But the Parowan Gap actually, and the climate in Utah, and the way the sun goes north and south in Utah actually fits the Parowan Gap perfectly, and gives them the 104-day growing season and 260 days for the rest of the calendar. And they related it to a 364-day calendar, which is 7 times 52. 260 days is 5 times 52. Okay, and 104 days is 2 times 52. It just so happens that in the ancient Hebrew calendar, they were also using a 364-day calendar, and I'll get into that in a few minutes here. But anyway, I'm going to move on here. Here's a drawing of the zipper glyph. And you can see the little sunsets with the numbers on them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And the narrow part of that petroglyph, that represents the split mountain gap itself with the valley on the east side below. They also use shadow markers in the Parowan Gap to mark certain dates. They would carve petroglyphs on certain rocks where a shadow would cross those rocks on certain days of the year. And they also used all these tick marks and calendar glyphs and all these symbols and sun glyphs and sun spirals and calendar counts and snake symbols. You see a little snake symbol trail marker there too as well. Anyway, this gives you an idea. It's about, this calendar went 40, 41 days, then 52 days to the summer solstice. And you see a corn plant there on the left side. That's the summer solstice. And then it went 52 more days and then 40 more days. So this went from equinox to equinox with the summer solstice in between this particular calendar. And that was a 182-day calendar. Okay. And then they would follow the calendar back again to the equinox. But this is a half a year, 182-degree calendar. Okay, this little glyph way up on a cliff. And I did a drawing of it because it's really hard to photograph. It's up so high, over 150 feet above the bottom of the gap. But there's a circle in the middle divided into 7 parts. There's 5 times 52 on the right side and 104 day with the bigger spaces on the left side. And that adds up to the 364-day calendar. Down at the lower right, just below that, is a God figure with some calendar divisions in it. And then this line on the left is divided into 6 parts on each side, represents the entire year, 6 months winter and 6 months in the summer. And so this is a Parowan Gap calendar glyph related to the big giant glyph that I just showed you. Okay, this is the lunar calendar. And we don't have time to explain all of it. This glyph here, D on the upper right, that's a 19-year Metonic cycle calendar. The cycles from new moon to full moon, that's a 19-year cycle. We call this the pregnant snake on the lower right, which has 52 spaces in it. So it's tied in with the same calendar, the 52-day division. Multiply that by 5 and 7 to get the 364-day count. This calendar right here, G in the center, that is a 29-day lunar calendar, okay? They also have a Venus calendar there. Now I'm going to compare the Parowan Gap to the Parowan Gap to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, okay? This is a 500 by 500 cubit geometric grid over the top of the Temple Mount. And you can see the Dome of the Rock in the center there. Go back to this one. This is where we believe the temple actually sat. Now, the Parowan Gap was an outdoor temple calendar site. Of course, the one in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount is also a calendar site, by the way. We believe that the ancient temple, which we believe stood just north of the Dome of the Rock, was that we believe that Solomon's temple was actually lined up to the sunrise on the Hebrew Passover date. And that it was also a calendar, and they would watch the sunrises during the whole week of Passover, and the temple was centered on those sunrises between the 2 pillars of Jachin and Boaz on Solomon's temple. Now, there's some things I need to explain to you about the Temple Mount just briefly before I compare it to the Parowan Gap, is that the Temple Mount is very controversial. It's one of the most controversial, well, maybe you could say it's the most controversial piece of land in the world. And the 3 Abrahamic religions, the Jews, the Christians, and the Islamic religion all claim that they have access and we're owned the Temple Mount and that they're connected to it. Okay, now the Muslims don't want the Jews up there, okay? And they don't want the Jews rebuilding their so-called third temple up there. It's very controversial. And there's a lot of Christian groups and Orthodox Jewish groups believe that they have to destroy the Dome of the Rock in order to rebuild this third temple. Now, I don't agree with any of that. It's sacred to all three religions, and that we need to pay attention to that. And until those three religions learn how to work together, it's going to be controversial. And just so you know how I feel about it. And so I'm going to be careful what I say about it. But anyway, we'll move on here. These are two squares that fit over the Temple Mount, and I'll just mention it briefly. The bigger square is 500 by 500 Egyptian royal cubits. The other square is 500 by 500 Assyrian Babylonian cubits. That's the smaller square. Now, when they laid out the Temple Mount, they measured from the rock, the summit of the Temple Mount, called the foundation stone. They measured a geodesic line over to the top of the summit of the Mount of Olives. And then they made the eastern wall of the Temple Mount perpendicular to that. But when they placed the temple on the Temple Mount, they used a second geometry and a second square, 500 by 500 Assyrian Babylonian cubits. And they lined that up with their calendar dates during the week of Passover. So there's actually two different geometries based on ancient geometric principles that from the star cut diagram, which goes clear back to ancient Egypt, and the ancient Hebrews used it. Remember, Moses was an Egyptian prince before the Israelites left Egypt. And I used the star cut diagram to give the 364-day calendar using geometry. So you do it symbolically. You notice where all the lines cross, there's a square with a circle in it. Then I have the half diagonals of the square, and then the full root 2 diagonals. The half diagonals are root 5 diagonals. And then I have the vertical and horizontal cross section through the center. And when I count all these nodes where the lines cross, there's 37 of them. That fits the ancient Hebrew calendar because they had a year of 12 lunations, another year of 12 lunations. Their third year, they had 13 lunations. When you add 12, 12, and 13 together, you get 37 lunations. And that adds up to exactly 3 times 364, 1,092 days. And that's 3 Enoch years of 364 days. And that's a calendar that I believe they were using on the Temple Mount. And then I represent, let the diagonals, you count 12 of them in there as counting all the lines that cross in the middle and so on. 2 plus 2 plus 8 equals 12. And 12 times 91 is also 10,092 days of the same calendar. And of course, 12 divided by 3 is 4 of the 4 seasons of the year. So anyway, this is another petroglyph in Utah. And this petroglyph, I have a book on the Knights of the Templar, and they even compare this to Knights of the Templar geometry and symbols. You notice that there's a figure at the top that looks like a hippopotamus. There's a couple of figures here that look like crocodiles and other animals and weird animals. It's got God figures on it. It's got a rainbow arch on the lower right, which represents the heavens. And then there's some glyphs at the top of the calendar. Over on the far right at the very top, you'll see a man holding up an animal skin with the God figure on it. That is the equinox marker. They measured from the spring equinox to the next marker on the left, a straight line. That is the Hebrew Passover date. And right to the left of that line, you'll see 7 little dots on a half circle. That either represents 7 times 52 for a total year, or it could be 7 lunations as well. And then in the center, there's a thicker short line. That line there, it marks the beginning and end of the 260-day calendar. And then there's a figure of a man playing a flute, a kokopelli, I believe they call it, player. And then there's a big long line on the left, and that is the summer solstice line, that big long line that goes from the top of the panel to the bottom. I'll go to the next figure here. Right below that center mark that marks the beginning and end of the 260-day calendar is this rainbow type figure, which represents the heaven. You notice got lines on it that could mark shadow markers. Now, what we discovered from studying this panel, it used to be an alcove, but the big rock on the east side, this is on the west side, it used to be like a little cave entrance, but the big rock on the outside had a crack at the base of it, and it tipped over and slid down the mountain. And we went and measured it and found that it fit this exact spot. So these used to be an alcove. So we realized they were measuring the shadows on this petroglyph panel from where the edge of that rock used to be. And so we set up a pole there and went there on all the equinoxes and solstices, beginning and end of the Mayan calendar, which went from August 12th back to April 29th. That was the 260-day, 9-month gestation calendar. You notice below the rainbow on the right, you'll see a female figure with an open womb, with her legs apart and an open womb.
Lance, could you wiggle your cursor so we can see where you are?
Can you see my
Thank you.
cursor?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Thank
a
you.
female figure with an open room. That represents the 9 months of gestation. They divided the 260 days into 9 months. Okay, that was their whole life cycle was based on that cycle. And then they had 104 days of summer. Below her, whoops, let me go back. Below her is a male figure, a copulating male figure that represents getting her pregnant and going through 9 months of gestation. Okay, but it was a sacred cycle to them, and that's why it's on this figure. And their whole life cycle was based on that. And that's the whole secret of this petroglyph panel, actually, the whole calendar system, the 260-day calendar at the top. Now, when you divide 260 by 9, it gives you 28.888 days. And you multiply that by 12 for a year, and it's an eclipse year. It's actually 346.666 days, eclipse year. So using the Mayan calendar, you take 3 Enoch years, subtract 52 days, and you get 1,040 days. That equals 4 times 260 and 3 times the eclipse year. So they were using the same calendar. They could predict eclipses and keep track of the whole year and everything. And this is recorded right in Utah as well as in Mesoamerica. Now, I worked for 4 different archaeologists, including Garth Norman, who was my neighbor here in Utah. And 2 of them, Garth Norman and Rick Hauk, that I worked for several years, they're both Mesoamerican expert archaeologists on Mesoamerican and the Mayan calendar. Okay, so we're not making this stuff up. Garth wrote a whole book on Izapa and the Mayan calendar. And so anyway, this is another glyph. I'll just mention this briefly. Shows 7 times 52, again, 260-day calendar on it. And then it gives month measurements on there as well. This is called the cocoon, and I'm going to move in this. We call this the cocoon shadow marker. And I'm going to move on to the actual photograph of it so you can see the shadow marker. Here's the shadow marker, and I have some better photographs, so we'll skip this one. This is the Parowan Gap in southern Utah. You notice it's a split mountain, big cliffs on both sides, and that's where they recorded all the petroglyphs. There's, like 800 petroglyphs in the gap, and I did drawings of all of them. I climbed all over the cliffs, all over the mountains, recorded all the petroglyphs for the archaeology reports. And here you see the gap here. This is looking west. This is looking west, where they watched all the sunsets through the gap. And then they had little rock cairns in this valley on the east side. And we mapped out all the rock cairns. We found out this is an outdoor temple sacred site. Now, the early Mormon pioneers, when they came to Utah, the first settlers in this part of the United States to settle, they sent an expedition down to examine this place and the valley to the east of it, where there were 3 Native American villages called the Parowan Valley. And Chief Wakera, one of the head Indian chiefs down there, told them that the Parowan Gap was God's own house. It's like a temple, okay? Now, when I studied in London with John Michell taught the philosophy that man, temple, and cosmos were all identical. And on this, the entire philosophy of the ancient world was founded on that proclamation. Anyway, here's a picture of this gap has a natural alignment with the summer solstice sunset. And this is the sunset over some hills out in the West Desert, the Escalante Desert. And you can see that it has this natural alignment with the sunsets on the summer solstice. That's why they chose the Perawan Gap. But they also watch the equinoxes and the winter solstice sunsets and everything through here, as well as the beginning and end of the 260-day Mayan calendar. And this is another photo of the same glyph. And this little narrow part in the center represents the gap itself. And then the trails in the East Valley where all the rock cairns are, and so on. And so they recorded the whole calendar there. Is really interesting. And this is another glyph. Up here we have the bird serpent, similar to Quetzalcoatl, which also has little circles in it that give the 260-day calendar, 52-day cycle. Down here is the spider map and the spider woman god petroglyph here. Garth actually measured this little horizontal glyph here with the notches in it, and it was based on ancient cubit measurements. Okay. Now here's the lunar calendar again. This is an actual photograph of the lunar calendar that I showed earlier. And this is like 8 feet tall. It's pretty big petroglyph too. Here's the famous cocoon, which is divided into months in the center. The divisions in the center are month measurements. But this is the shadow marker at the beginning and end of the 260-day calendar. The shadow lines up with what we call a cocoon glyph.
Wow.
It represents a rebirth. And then there's a little, what we call the corn plant on the right. And the shadow moves over and touches the corn plant in just a few minutes after it touches the cocoon glyph. And this is one method they use to record the calendars called a shadow marker. And this is really significant because it marks the beginning and end of the 260-day calendar right in Utah, which was derived originally down in Mesoamerica. And then there's this little mysterious cave at the gap. Okay, you got to check this cave before you go in it, that there's no rattlesnakes in here, okay? So I actually crawled in there, and a sun dagger comes in this cave at the beginning and end of the 260-day Mayan calendar. But you can't stand up in there. You can only sit in there. And it has petroglyphs and some pictographs painted on the ceiling, some really interesting glyphs. But when I sat in there at the beginning of the 260-day calendar on August 12th, this light comes in there. Well, I'll show you this one first. The sun dagger comes in and moves across some circular petroglyphs, and one of them is a spiral. It goes through a little V shape on one side, and this marks the beginning and end of the 260-day calendar as well. Okay. We'll go back to this one. And that's when the sun dagger gets wider. This gives you a better view of the hidden petroglyphs in there. 2 circular glyphs with a little gap here. The sun dagger moves through this little gap and then across these 2 circles to mark the calendar. Okay, now I'm going to go to the Temple Mount Jerusalem and make a comparison. The Perawan Gap was a sacred outdoor temple site. But now we're going to go to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Before I went to the Temple Mount with Garth Norman and John Pratt, Garth Norman is an archaeoastronomer as well as an archaeologist. And John Pratt was an expert in ancient calendars, including the Hebrew calendars. And we did research on the Temple Mount, but you can't just go up there and do research. We had to pretend to be tourists. And we only got in trouble with the Islamic guards a couple of times. So, but you just act like a dumb tourist. And but we went up anyway. I did some research from the Bible on the original tabernacle of Moses, and I found out it's all based on this ancient Egyptian geometry called the star diagram or the golden mandala. And you notice the green gives the courtyard measurements, 50 by 100 cubits. You notice where the Ark of the Covenant sits in the Holy of Holies and the altar in the courtyard in front of the tabernacle. It gives an orange seal of Solomon, a Star of David. and I found that in the same geometry through the quarter points. You have the first quarter, the halfway point, the 3/4 mark. When you draw lines, horizontal lines through there, it gives you equilateral triangles, and the seal of Solomon, right, found in the tabernacle of Moses. This is the courtyard, close up of the courtyard, with the tabernacle itself right here at the top center. And you have the menorah, you have the altar of incense, and the table of showbread inside of the first room of the tabernacle. And then you have the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And it's all based on actually an approximation of ancient squared circle geometry. And then you have the wash basin out here and the sacrificial altar in the courtyard in front of the tabernacle. And but you can see how well the geometry fits this. Remember that Moses was an Egyptian prince, grew up in the courts palace, and Moses would have known all this geometry as well as the cubit measurements they were using. Mainly the Egyptian royal cubit and the Syrian Babylonian cubit were both used in ancient Egypt. Here's another close-up of the tabernacle, and this is how it relates to the cross-section of the later Temple of Solomon. And this would be a vertical cross-section of Solomon's temple, just the basic proportions. And but Solomon's temple was based, the interior of Solomon's temple, they added a porch in the front, the bottom here, but it was based on the same geometry as the tabernacle. Now this orange circle has a circumference equal to the perimeter of that square, and that square gives the veil which enters into the Holy of Holies, the top of the square, and then the circle runs through where the Ark of the Covenant was. And then the porch of Solomon's temple would have been down here. But you remember that Solomon's temple was double the dimensions of the tabernacle, okay? This is a cross-section of Solomon's temple. This is both a ground plan and a vertical cross-section of Solomon's temple. It's based on the same measurements, only the measurements are double. The tabernacle was 10 by 30 cubits. This is 20 by 60 cubits. And it's on a foundation 40 by 60. When the porch is added, it's 40 by 70. And then the whole foundation is 60 by 100 cubits. So it's double the dimensions of the tabernacle. And then, of course, they added these side rooms based on 7, 6, and 5 cubits on both sides of Solomon's temple, which were rooms that the priests used for various things. And anyway, that gives you a basic idea of how the ancient geometry was used. The Hebrews knew about that sacred geometry, by the way, too, because they lived in Egypt. Then we go to the Temple Mount itself, and I'm almost finished here. This is on the platform of the Temple Mount itself. Now, when we went there on the day of Passover, the Hebrew Passover date, which is approximately April 6th in April. And this is back in 2008. And we went up on the platform. Garth started having me do some sketches of some things with the Mount of Olives behind there. This is the top of the Mount of Olives up here. And then this part of the platform, you notice a well here and a well here. This platform is downsloped on both the north and south sides, which are on the left and right here, south side on the right. But it has a center axis in it. Okay. And when we were on this platform on the Hebrew Passover date, Garth measured with a compass the angle of the sunrise and calculated that approximately where the sun would rise over the summit of the Mount of Olives and shine between the two pillars. And so we came to the conclusion that the temple was lined up with the sunrises during Passover. But this center axis, Garth sat down and measured the width of these stones and very carefully. And they were based on the Assyrian Babylonian cubit in width, which is really an old cubit. So we don't believe the Muslims actually built this part of the platform. We think it's much older, okay? And the center axis here is where we believe ran through the center of the temple, actually. And there's drainage channels there's other axes on the north and south that have drainage channels in them. And so that the water would go in the drainage channels and around the temple and collect in water cisterns underneath this platform. There's several water cisterns right underneath this platform that would be underneath the temple as well, where the temple stood, where they would store water. And here's another view of the center axis, looking directly towards the east. Actually, this angle is about 81 degrees, just slightly north of east, whereas the axis of the Temple Mount is about 60 degrees north of east. And you'll notice right here at the bottom, there's a drainage channel with holes in it where the water would drain down into the water cisterns underneath. And this was on the west side of where the temple would stood. North and south sides also have similar channels. This is archaeologist Garth Norman, who was an expert in Mesoamerican archaeology here, who helped with our survey on the Temple Mount. This is John Pratt, expert, calendar expert, an astronomer too. I'm standing in the center here to make myself look good here. And over here, you'll notice the Dome of the Rock. But Garth and I did research together for many years. We actually went to the British Museum, the Louvre in Paris, other museums in the United States. We measured all of these ancient statues to find out if we could find cubit measurements on it. We measured ancient Egyptian statues. We measured ancient Assyrian and Babylonian statues. And I thought, oh, when we first started this project, I thought, well, we might find a few cubit measurements. Well, every single statue we measured, we found divisions of those same 2 cubits, the Assyrian Babylonian cubit, the Egyptian royal cubit. We found it in their arm measurements, the cubit measurements in their arms. We found it in their foot measurements, divisions of these cubits, like quarter cubits, half cubits. We found the larger statues had cubits that were a cubit and a half, cubit and a quarter. Every single statue we measured had cubit measurements on it, either one of these 2 cubits. So Garth published a book, and I helped him with it, and called The Cubit Connection in Ancient World Migrations. And we found out that they were using the same sacred geometry that I just showed you on the Temple Mount. They were using the same sacred geometry on the Aztec calendar stone, which I will talk about further when we give the workshops, and the Zodiac of Dendera from the Dendera Temple in ancient Egypt. They were using the same geometry in Mesoamerica as in the Old World, in Mesopotamia and Egypt. They were also using the same 2 cubit measurements. Garth went all over Mesoamerica, and he measured the Aztec calendar stone as well. They were using the same cubit measurements on all their sculptures and artwork and temples and their stones in Mesoamerica as well. Now, this proves that there's oceanic connections between the Old World and the New World, long before Columbus or anything else. It goes back thousands of years, actually. So it just changes your thinking about a lot of things when you get into this.
For sure.
And this last picture is Garth and I just standing on the Temple Mount together. That's Garth on the left and me on the right there. And we were kind of amazed. And when we were on this, up there on the Passover date, when we first got there were 4 Islamic guards guarding the area. And then they got together and started talking to each other. And all of a sudden they got up and left the Temple Mount. And we had the whole Temple Mount to ourselves to study it for like 2.5 hours alone, and nobody interfered. It was kind of a miracle for us. So anyway, thanks.
You. Wonderful, Lance. You've just done some incredible research. It's amazing. You know, I've been to a lot of sacred sites, you know, Scotland, and of course all throughout England and Wales and Ireland, and of course Czech Republic, throughout Europe. But you've really got me interested in the Parowan Gap. You've spoken about it for quite some time, and what's a good season to actually be there when it's not too hot? What's actually a good month to actually go there?
You can go to the equinoxes in the spring or the fall and watch.
The equinox would be perfect. Yeah.
The summer solstice is good, but sometimes it gets a little windy and hot. You can also go there on August 12th or April 29th or 30th when it's cooler, and watch the through the gap on the beginning and end of the 260-day calendar.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Wow. Well, listen, guys, it's your show now. As we've said to you, thanks for hanging in there. And we're going to open it up to preferably with your questions. If you just unmute yourself, is probably the best way of going about doing this. I can check the chat window as well. But as you can see, you know, it's a full spectrum of studies here that we're offering. Just why I think of it, we have actually extended the early payment discount for the August workshop. We've extended it for another 2 weeks. It did technically end this weekend, but we thought, well, because we're doing this workshop with you guys, we've extended it to the 16th of July, which is technically 1 month before the workshop starts here in New York, which is starting on August the 17th. So you'll see the link when I send out the recording. You'll see the Eventbrite link to the August workshop, and it's a very, very reasonable price. And it starts with August the 17th, which is a really fun evening, by the way. We'll have wine and food and just a celebration, which is an open sort of house, and we'll do an introduction. And then we go into a 5-day intensive workshop with Scott, Melodi, and Lance. So as you can see, really full spectrum of studies, you know, the link up with alchemy, this whole, you know, getting, as I've said before, getting close to God, you know, when we really start to feel the macro within the micro, and the, you know, that whole theme of as above, so below, and so below as above. That's something that we can really, really explore in this workshop and feel close to by doing the drawings and all the other tactile things, and just being part of a group, part of a soul group. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys. We're happy to be with you. There's no rush. I know we said it goes to like 4 o'clock here in New York, but we're happy to take all the questions and comments. And so go for it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing lifetime of wisdom. It's just totally incredible. And I get excited every time that I'm with this group, and just so blessed to you're offering this workshop. And I'm very excited to attend. I do have some questions about particulars. Unless someone else has a question, you're welcome to jump in.
Go for it, Diana.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever.
So for the open house, is that for people that might be interested in finding out more to attend? So if there was someone in New York that I knew that might want to go, is that what that's for? That they could
That's right.
pay $20 and
It's
go?
just $20 cash at the door.
Okay.
They get their money worth if just by drinking the wine anyway.
Sure.
Because you know, we put on some wine and finger food, but you know, we do an introduction, and it's a kind of like a celebration atmosphere that evening, and totally open to bring your friends along, and you know, to celebrate. You see, back in the 60s in New York, they used to do these sort of events, you know, of Andy Warhol and all of that. And I got one of the best compliments in my life one day by John Lloyd. He said, because he's a New Yorker, he said, Roger, what you put on, you know, with these fun evenings, it's a bit like, you know, when we're hanging out with Andy Warhol, but without the drugs. You know? So no, it's an open evening. Come along, bring your friends, pick up some innocent bystanders along the way, and bring them along. Yeah.
And then if any of them would decide to attend the workshop, they could then pay like at the door for the next day or
That's
something?
right. I mean, they kind of miss out on that early payment discount, but you know, so be it. So it doesn't, you know, it jumps up a couple of $100, so it's not, you know, but it's still very, very reasonable.
So there's not another deadline between this one and then, so it'd be just $250 more if they
Yeah,
sign
something
up.
like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's fine. You know, we got plenty of room. It's in the center, and the room is beautiful. and we'll have tables out that people can draw on. And it's a lovely space. It's on 53rd Street here on the east side. Lots of restaurants around, and you know, we've got some fun sort of extra things planned as well.
With those extra things planned, is that like in the evenings or on the
Well, for
weekends?
instance, the Sunday we're going to do a
Okay.
little. We're going to go to St. John's Cathedral. We want to
Okay.
go to Central Park and do a little biomimicry with Melodi, and then in the evening we'll be back doing drawings on Sunday evening, and we'll have a dinner together just in the street. There's a lovely Turkish restaurant up the road here, so Melodi will be happy. So that's a Sunday, but usually every day it's sort of like 9:30 to 5 in the lecture room.
And then at 5, do people kind of like, do you all disperse and go on your way, or do people hang out together in the evenings? Or
That's up to everybody to decide. You know, we're going to have that group dinner on the Sunday, an early dinner, and then come back. But you know, we could always get together Saturday night as well. That's all flexible. We can just plan that as we go along, you know.
because I'm trying to work out where I might stay, and I have no clue of that, and trying to work out those details. So
Yeah, that one I always just leave it up to you, because basically you just go online and you find what suits the budget, which you can easily do. You know, you just go online. The postcode is 10022.
yeah,
Even if you found a reasonably priced hotel downtown, you know, the 6 train, the E train, the M train is just on the corner here. So you could get here in 15 minutes. So Manhattan is very easy to work out and get around. So I don't get involved with the accommodation, because it's just, you have to just book it online and sort out your own budget, you know.
right. I have someone that lives about an hour north, and I could do that, but I just didn't know if that would
Oh,
not.
that would be fine, because really the subway system is pretty good in Manhattan. You just work out what bus, you know, you could get here, or what train
Right.
you could get here. And an hour away is nothing. This is nothing for this part of the world. You know, people come in from New Jersey, you know, to the workshop. You know?
Mhm. Can you tell me a little bit about the scholarship that's available?
It is available. So for everybody, just so you know, we do have a very, very reasonably priced scholarship, and it does involve where we can provide some basic accommodation here in our center here. So we have a shared, you know, 3 females in one room, 3 males in another room. Very, very basic. But it means that you don't have to pay for accommodation elsewhere, and it's a very, very reasonable price. It's technically for people under 30, so that we can just encourage young people to study this. So we didn't want the financial thing to be a hindrance. But then again, it's sort of open. It really is becoming first in, first served. If you email me on info@academysacredgeometry.com, you know, we can have a conversation about the scholarship. And
Okay.
there's still plenty of room available for that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is there a cost for that scholarship?
Yes, but it's virtually 50%.
50%. Okay.
Yeah, but you know, those details I'll go through with you, you know, person to person. But it's
Right.
the scholarships are a damn good deal. And if somebody's sitting on the fence, especially if you're a younger person, and you think, oh, you know, getting to New York, well, jump on it, guys. That scholarship's really good, and it just means you help out a little bit during the workshop, which is not a big task at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Melody, did you say we were going to be building the 3D sculptures, or will we just be experiencing them by holding ones that are already built?
Right now we have so many things in the hands-on, so it is like a building up the process. So it is depending on the schedule. So we will mostly build up this golden rulers, and we will do some Catalan modelings with the paperworks. So this is the ones that we are planning, and this is also the unfoldment of the dimensions. So it will teach so much.
That's exciting.
Thank you, Diane.
Yes, and going to the park and probably, observing nature.
Yeah,
That's
we will
great. And
look into nature's design. So
fabulous. And the people, the churches, cathedrals too,
Yeah.
to go with you experts that can point these things out that we might not catch otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, do you think this will be available for purchase afterwards?
For what?
The like recordings of the workshop, will it be available to be purchased or after, do you think, or not? I know it's 5 days, so it's a lot.
we have
Well, we haven't really sort of got into that. The whole focus of August is to have an old-fashioned school like Plato had.
Yes.
And to
Celebrate
get together
together.
physically and to do the physical drawings and to celebrate it like that. We will film it, but that's a whole different subject. We don't really have anything planned
Sure.
with that one, because that's takes resources and editing, and it being a 5-day event, that's something else. But who knows? That could be in the pipeline further down the track, but we don't know.
Is there anything that you suggest that we should bring? I know a notebook and our compass and such, pencils or whatever, but is there anything that we should bring or read ahead of time to prepare?
Well, we're going to send out a materials list, because it is appropriate to bring a nice big drawing pad, colored pencils, a compass. We'll send out a materials list. But just your standard thing, some walking shoes, a water bottle, just nothing special. Yeah.
Okay, and the dress is just casual, right? I mean, just trying to pack for things, just casual.
Oh no, we all wear funny hats.
That are tinfoil ones.
Yeah, that's right. Very much so. Yeah.
Great, I'll bring my roll.
Yeah.
Anything but cheeseheads.
Yeah.
Just teasing.
That would be fun. I think that's all the questions I have. I mean, I guess that's it. I was concerned a little bit about my elderly parents if I signed up and something happened, if there's any refund, but I mean, I wouldn't anticipate having to cancel, but I have 88-year-old parents that, if I had to, is that any problem or?
We'll
I
sort it out.
Yeah, to sort that out.
Yeah, Diana,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
counting on that. I'm counting on everything fine.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so John, you've got your hand up. Very polite of you putting your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the host and the presenters. Oh, where did I go?
Yeah, we lost the video for some reason. We can hear you, but
There we go.
yeah. You
Yeah,
can put your video back on if you want,
Yeah.
John. Yeah. There you go.
There we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to lower my hand and hit the wrong button, but I wanted to thank the host and the presenters for bringing together such varied arcane knowledge and the similarities from all the different areas of the world, bringing together this similar geometry. And coming from the Fuller Institute, as I do, and understanding that the geometry is the basis of experience, of reality, and it's just humankind's attempt to reach out and understand the miracle that we're existing in. And that in seeing the patterns, it redefines your place in universe. And that all of this coming together says it's been an ancient study from before, time immemorial, before we could communicate across distances. And now that we're bringing everything together, it gives me hope for the future. And I just wanted to thank you all for that.
Well, amen to that. Any comments, Scott, Lance, Melody?
Well, I think John's absolutely right. And it's so nice to have you present with us, John, representing the Fuller Institute and that whole tradition, because one of our main teachers, as you know, is Heath Critchlow, who was really closely allied to Buckminster Fuller. And that's one of Melody's shining. She has so many things to offer, and that's her connection. And she'll be bringing that out in the workshop, and she did that in Peru for us. It's just really wonderful to have the connection with the Fuller Institute in Bucky.
Thank you.
Irina, you have your hand up? We can't hear. Oh, yep, we can hear you.
Sorry, I didn't have my mute off. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Great presentations as always. I just want to ask you, because I come from a little bit of a more experienced background in sacred geometry, how much of the workshop is going to be really just like superficial, level, and how much of it can be like this dive into a little bit more experiential workshop where we're talking about forms like you were just mentioning, I think earlier, Melody, where the form of one meshed to another and created like this play of geometries. And I know that my interest in particular with sacred geometry is the flow of it, right? The fluidity of why one form is over another form and how it can be expressed in architecture that actually right now with 3D modeling, you're using primitives. We're all like using primitives in 3D design. And yet, what's the difference between an architecture that actually starts with a torus versus an architecture that starts with a circle or a sphere? And so the language of architecture, which is very three-dimensional, I feel that we need to bring out the three-dimensionality of the sacred forms. And so I would love to see if there's any day in particular that this is more of a focus, more on a larger level of understanding beyond just drawing dodecas and, the flower of life or things like that. So that was my question.
Okay, I would love to start. Firstly, I think especially after our workshop in the online, so we will totally connect with the more deeper understanding of the line and the all connections. So it won't be just like the flower of light drawing or like, so it will be totally experiencing the space, especially like Lance have mentioned about the golden mandala, but it is totally 3-dimensional and over 3-dimension even. So it has the volume inside, and so it is also not the drawing, but the connection seeing. So as I understand from your expression, and so I really understand because the architecture is really the space. So it is not just the lines. And so and the ones that you show is like more, especially the structural order of nature, these ones, the space shifting ones, especially. And so this is my profession on kinetic architecture. So I will bring the architecture parts as well, but I think we will view all these ones in 5 days.
Okay.
So, this is my expression for your question.
And in general, I believe you said something about electromagnetism, or is that related to anything on bioarchitecture, or how is it related to? Like,
It is about, again, the form correlation of the magnets. So we will experience new things, which we had never experienced before.
okay, well, I look forward to it. All right, sounds good. Thank you.
As you know,
And I
Melodi
think
is
Scott-
bringing her architectural schools to the workshop as well.
Sorry, Roger, I don't hear you.
I was just saying to Irina, I'm sure that she knows that you're also an architect, and
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
bringing her architectural skills to the workshop as well,
Yeah.
and how she's been applying it to her work, etc.
Yeah, very good.
And I'm sure that Scott and Lance will have will answer this question.
Yeah, both Scott and Melody just gave, you know, that presentation in, where was it? Portugal?
Peru.
Peru.
Oh,
Just the one you did recently.
Mhm.
I mean, you had a lot of architecture studies in that one, so.
yeah. To Irina's question, for the last 6 months, I've been intensely studying architecture of cathedral building for the Portuguese esoteric quest, Platonic principles in high medieval architecture, churches, etc. And so that'll be part of what I'll be bringing forth. Some really amazing things that we found. So yes, I think you'll find this a very fascinating workshop, that nothing superficial whatsoever. Nevertheless, even people who are beginning, we will take them along and we will figure out how to help them. But there's nothing superficial about what we're going to be doing whatsoever.
Awesome. And just in general, the workshop is set up like a couple of hours during the day, or is it like the whole day on a certain
It's a whole
topic?
day,
A whole-
Irina. It's a
right.
it's a 5-day intensive training.
Right. So when
It's
you're
sort of
learning,
9:30 to 5 each day, except the Sunday we break it up a bit, you know. And of course we have lunch and breaks and, you know. the normal.
right, but I meant in terms of like the activity, it's centered on presentations and then an interactive event.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm saying. So the interactive event part is a certain time frame from that lecture time, I
Well,
guess.
Irina, it'll be a combination of all of the above, and we
Mhm.
will work out that. There's no set time right now as to when the interaction, but believe me,
Okay.
the
Okay.
three of us, Melody and I have worked together before, and Lance and I have worked together before in presentations. And so I guarantee you, we will put together a real
Yeah.
package, dynamite package.
I look forward to it, actually. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So both Scott and I have done some research on the Great Pyramid of Khufu in Egypt. And we found some really amazing things related to the golden section and pi. And also I've studied rainbow geometry of light, and I found a connection with the Great Pyramid and some other things. And so I'm kind of interested in electromagnetic fields as well. So.
Mhm. Okay, any other questions, guys? The floor is yours.
Well, we really hope you folks will join us, those of you who have tuned in or will be listening to this later on, because I can guarantee you that the three of us right now, from my knowledge of sacred geometry, are right on the cutting edge of the philosophy of it, but also the practice of it. So we're looking forward to this, and we're going to pull out all stops on this. And from my contribution, I can guarantee you that I intend to crack the Platonic code, because nobody has really sufficiently done that. I gave you a taste of it already, but there's so much more that is significant. And I'm with two outstanding people in this field. Really, the three of us are going to knock it out of the park in New York.
So is there any more questions? Here's your chance, guys, just before we sign off. So I think we've done it.
Well,
Yeah, go for it, John.
I do know that I will probably be reaching out to the Academy and as many of the presenters as possible, because one of my obsessions lately has been the progression through the Platonic solids as one grows into the next.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very much at the nexus of the cube between the tetrahedron and the dodecahedron. So it's, and of course 3D modeling is again cutting edge, because we can now study these movements and how they progress. But you know, this is such a repository of knowledge. It's just a wonderful gathering of minds.
Let me add a comment for you, John. Michael Barron went to Los Alamos. They were having troubles coordinating things. People are at each other's necks over things. So Michael Barron, who developed this kit of die-cut models to create both Platonic and Archimedean solids, but also figured out ways like Melodi's doing at present, and you may be doing the same thing, finding how they fold into one another. And so he brought out his kit and he started to open them up and show how they would flow into one another. The whole place, they couldn't believe it. Remember what Heraclitus said, the way up and the way down are one and the same.
And how
Brahma
do you spell
creation.
his name? Oh, sorry, Scott.
Michael Barron, B-A-R-R-O-N, Michael
Okay.
Barron. And but essentially, so what I'm saying is the way up and the way down are one and the same. Creation and destruction are one and the same. And that's why the ancients, to give this knowledge away, they had to be extremely careful, because this knowledge is extremely powerful. What had happened was they thought that he was exposing their top secrets on nuclear detonation. And that again is part of the problem. The same mathematics and these same Platonic solids that are used to grow are also involved in the most destructive process you can imagine. So my 2 cents on that. But thank you, John. We're going to be working on that with you.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in August, and feel free to email me if you've got any further questions. But it's been great hanging out today. So we'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.